Hi, so it's time for the third time to go back into the past and have a look at the World of Warcraft through the rose-tinted eyes of this old Paladin. Now, for this part, we're not going to cover one expansion, we're going to cover two, the reasons for which will hopefully become clear. So we're going to cover Wrath of the Lich King and Cataclysm. Remember, this is my personal experiences of the game, especially playing a Paladin. Now, when Wrath began, Wrath first of all was the first expansion for which I did the beta. I hadn't done that for TBC and I hadn't played beta World of Warcraft. So this was my first experience of beta. I got in reasonably early, so I got to see Death Knights being mucked about all over the place. But from the Paladin point of view, what I was really excited when I got into beta is like, oh my goodness, because mana regen, we have mana regen, and this went through various iterations. It didn't end up as it started with. We had a sort of evocation when I first got into beta, where literally you would stand still, do nothing, but you'd use this ability with channeled, and it restored all your mana. So you could actually blow all these mana-intensive abilities that you'd use very sparingly before, like Consecrate and things like this. I mean, you had all these abilities as a Paladin, but you just couldn't use them because you run out of mana. But now you could, and you just use this thing called Divine Plea. Divine Plea ended up in the game. It just didn't work quite as it did in the start of beta. It sort of changed. And then we also got something called Replenishment, where it was just Retribution Talent, which gave mana back to the rest of the raid as well as yourself. It sort of buffed the whole raid with this thing. So they were going some way to sort of addressing our resource problems in Wrath, which was very encouraging. We had Divine Storm. So with TBC, we'd got Crusader Strikes. We were starting to get more tools as well. And now we got Divine Storm. Did a bit of healing. Now, quite topical at the moment, because you notice, if any of you have looked at the traits we get on the Ashbringer in Legion, it's doing that again. We could have healing on Divine Storm again. Might not do very much. Didn't do a great deal then. It was just a token amount, really. But still, it wasn't too bad. None too shabby. And the ability was pretty decent as well. But I would say the hybrid tax was still very much in evidence. Not least of which with the talents. Of course, talents were very different then. You didn't just have a few rows and you pick one from each. You had a whole list, and you had for every level from level 10 onwards, you had one talent point. So as a level 70, you had 60. Hold on, let me get this right. Yeah, you had 61 talent points because you did get one at level 10. And then when you get into level 80, it'd be like 71 talent points. But you only needed about 60 of them for damage. Only about 60 talents improved your damage, which left you at level cap at Wrath of the Lich King with about 20-ish talents to spend purely on utility, which is fine. I mean, not going to knock utility. It's just that it was utility that wasn't always used, and everyone else was getting, or most other DPS were getting to spend like the full amount of talents on damage increasing abilities. So you felt very hybrid, basically. And that's not to say you couldn't do competitive damage. I always felt competitive in my guild, and my guild was no slackers. So that was absolutely fine, and everyone looks back with, never mind rose-tinted glasses, misty-eyed glasses at Wrath times for Retribution Paladin. I think Shadowmourne might have had something to do with that. But yeah, so spending all these talent points on utility just didn't do it for me. But for me, Wrath, I didn't have a huge amount of experience with. The reason being, it started off as normal. I took about a week to level up to cap because I'm having to fit it around work. I do a job where I can't just book holidays when I want. I get a lot of holidays. It's just that expansions never seem to come out at the suitable times of the year. Might change in Legion if we get a summer release. But so far, the expansions have never come out when I've had holiday. So it took about a week to level up. And then you do your usual thing. You start doing a few dungeons to get a bit of gear. But as soon as I was leveled up, we had a decent number of other people leveled up, and we started doing the raids. And the raids that were brought out at the time, you had Obsidian Sanctum, which was a one-boss raid. You had 3 little mini-bosses in it, but essentially it was one boss raid. You had Malagos, which is another one-boss raid, and then you had Naxxramas, which was a terrible, terrible incarnation of the tier 3 Naxxramas, which was an absolutely awesome instance. But they'd completely ripped everything out of it to the point where it was so easy. In fact, I'll tell you how easy it was. Yes, we'd sort of done Naxxramas before, so you could argue we weren't going to have as much learning to do as some other people. But I got to level 80 after about a week. I'll look up the timestamps in a minute and put it behind me, so you'll see more accurate than I do. A few days later, I had killed all the raid content. And this is how daft it was. I had killed every raid boss in the game, you know, that had been brought out at Wrath, before I even killed every dungeon boss. That's how bad it was. I finished the last raid boss, which I think was Malygos, and I still had dungeons I hadn't done. Mental. A few days to clear everything. I'll tell you what, I weren't in method. We're not in method. We were in a decent guild, but we weren't on that sort of guild. We just went in to Nax and just cleared it. I think we did a couple of nights. I can't remember. It might have just, yeah, I think it was just a couple. I think some people did like one wing the night before because not quite everyone had leveled up and I hadn't quite leveled up. And then we went in when we had a full 25 people at level 80 in blues and just cleared the whole thing. When I killed Malygos, I was still skilling up my weapon. I'd got a blue pole arm, I think, from a dungeon. Or it might have been a reputation vendor item. I can't remember. But I had this blue... I remember I had this blue pole arm. And back then you had to get weapon skill. You couldn't just automatically use it like we can now. I mean, weapon skill was a very bad idea anyway. But you had to actually use a weapon to get your weapon skill up. So you would miss a lot. So I was missing a fair amount of Malygos anyway because I was skilling the bloody weapon up still. And I think I did have it skilled up by the time we killed him, to be fair. But... I mean, that's just how quickly we were killing these bosses. So what was left then to do? Nothing. We had achievements were just brought out in Wrath. And, you know, and then people like achievements, and then they're a really good feature in the game, but it's not anything really for me. It's certainly not what I'd call content. If I've killed all the bosses, for me, that's the achievement. Doing, you know, the achievements associated with bosses, okay, that took us a good while longer. That was more difficult. But I just so annoyed with all this. I was annoyed with several things. First of all, they had completely destroyed Naxxramas. I cannot even tell you the difference there was with it. And they'd made, I mean, the tier 3 Paladin set is like one of the worst, if not the worst Paladin set. I always say it makes you look like Buck Rogers. In the original tier 3, I did without it. You didn't really need it. You could get by without it. But I felt in tier 7, when we had to get it around for the second time round, you sort of needed it, especially as DPS. You can't be affording to turn down upgrades. So I had to wear it. And you can hide the helm, but you can't hide the shoulder. You can in Legion, you can hide the shoulders, but you couldn't then. So I was stuck with it, these bloody stupid shoulders. All sorts of things were annoying me. And then there was no content, no raid content. We cleared the raid content in a week, or like 10 days or something. And then what to do then? Just nothing to do. Just do achievements. So what I said, look, I'm sick of this. I sort of realised as well I probably wasn't getting out into the world, in the real world. You know, real world, it's that game where the graphics are great, but, you know, the gameplay sucks. But I thought I should get out there a bit more. And World of Warcraft thought, you know, there's nothing really pulling me in anymore. So I quit at the end of... just before Ulduar was coming out, at the end of tier 7, that's right, just before Ulduar was coming out, and I went off and tried. I went out into the world and then did a few MMOs casually because I thought I can't play WoW casually. I need to raid, so I won't be able to do it casually. So I didn't just sort of step back. I just cold turkeyed it, and and then missed Ulduar, which a lot of people have since told me is fantastic raid, and I can well see why because I've sort of obviously done it since, and I can well see why people really like that raid. But there were a few good features certainly with Wrath that came in. You had the Justice and Valor points. Justice points had already been in, but then they sort of introduced Valor points for like epic type gear, raid type gear. So you could gear up a little bit in the early days of the expansion to smooth over any RNG of loot drops. That was always really good. Sorry, you know, just supplement your gear like that. It had always been a good idea. I mean, the only achievement that I really enjoyed in Tier 7 was the Sartharian 3 Drakes 10 man. On 25 man, it was a piece of piss. 10 man, different because of the composition. I went a bizarre mixture of retribution and protection because, you know, I was off tanking a lot of ads so that we didn't have to deal with them so much, but we still wanted replenishment in the raid because we took like a few casters. So I went down the retribution tree to get replenishment, and then the rest in prot, and then used tanking gear to handle the ads. And that's how we did the 3D on 10 man, and that was good. That was actually challenging. That was, you know, I enjoyed it. Even though we did that fairly quick. I mean, we went in one night, had a little look at it. We had spent half an hour or so on looking at it, and I sort of said, look, you know, I ought to adopt this spec because then that'll be the best of both worlds. And I said, I'll just go off and respec. They said, no, don't worry, but we'll come back the next day. And we came back the next day. It took about an hour, I think, and got it. So it didn't take long, but it did at least. It felt a damn sight more challenging than anything else we'd done that tier. So, yeah, I mean, to say that was the high point, something that maybe took an hour and a half of progress, is pretty bad. Pretty bad indeed. So, yeah, I went off. I ended up playing a few other MMOs casually, did Lord of the Rings Online, Warhammer Online as well. Just bouncing between those, really. And then I sort of... Something happened. What happened? My graphics card met. I had terrible PC problems, the like of which I've never had during that period. My graphics card melted, so I had to get another one, but I had to get one really quickly, you know. And I'm sure, like a lot of you, the thought of having no computer, even for a few hours, is like, no. So I went out and bought one of the shops around here. Crap. So I bought, you know, what I could, which worked, but it didn't work. Like, I couldn't play Warhammer Online anymore, and you know, I'd just gone off Lord of the Rings Online a little bit because the end game there was a bit crap. So then I just did WoW. I did have a forced to, because I wanted to play an MMO too. I was going to be playing WoW casually, and found out that it was fine for World of Warcraft. So that tells you something about the engine that World of Warcraft uses, that is better than a lot of games, because with a much lower spec graphics card, I was able to run it fine, even in dungeons, even in raids, come to that. So I came back a little bit just casual in my guild. You know, it had this thing. I mean, they'd had before the daily dungeon quest, which was nice. That was good. You know, but then they had this sort of weekly raid quest as well that they'd introduced, whereby you kill a particular boss. It's usually an early boss in one of the raids, and you get some valor points or something like that. So I got to see a few of the older war bosses like that, because I went with like the guild that I was to. They hadn't kicked me or anything, so I was still in that guild. And it was a complete scrub, not having a clue what was going on, but they were just blasting through it all because they were, you know, really well geared, of course. And yeah, I was impressed with just the look of Ulduar. I didn't know what the fights were like, of course, because I was just YOLOing my way through them. But the look of Ulduar looked really good, so I was thinking, if I'd have known about this, I might not have quit. But anyway, so that was really good as well. Now, then what happened is a friend of mine who had played, he's the one who actually got me into World of Warcraft in the first place. He kept dipping out in and out of the game, and he came back and said, well, he was in a guild with his partner and some real life friends, and I knew these people as well, and I thought, okay, well, they were Horde, so I said, well, I'll create a character there then and just do some casual gaming with them, do some casual raiding, see what it's like when you're not doing it really seriously. So I first of all rolled a Death Knight, just because you get that head start, to get myself leveled up really quickly so I could get into, because ICC was about to come out. So we were doing that, not a very fast level, not a very high level as well. Forget about heroics, heroic modes. We were just doing the normal, like, 10-man content, the crap content. But it was a very, very casual and not at all serious guild. And while that was happening, I was leveling up a Paladin, so that could be Paladin as well. And then when I got that leveled up, and of course they brought in the catch-up dungeons, the 3 dungeons that were linked to ICC. I can't remember the name of them now. Forge of Souls, Pit of Sauron, not Sauron, Pit of Sauron, and Halls of something. I was going to say Halls of Reflection then, but I don't think that's it, is it? Something anyway. The one where you're going around with Jane if you're Alliance. or Sylvanas if you horde, and going after the Lich King, or escaping from the Lich King, as it would turn out in the end. They were a really good idea because then it got you boosted up with gear. You could run those things quite regularly, get yourself a load of gear, get yourself raid ready. So I did that on the Paladin as well. As soon as I was raid ready, switch from the Death Knight to the Paladin. Sometimes ret, sometimes healing, sometimes protection. Switch between them as necessary. And it was okay. I found that I was able to play casually. That was interesting. And not just casually, because there's a difference between playing casually with players who are really good, they just don't have time, and players who are not so good. Or variable, shall we say. I mean, the friend whose guild I joined, he was a very good player. And there were a couple of others, but mostly they were not. And I was okay with it. It is what it is. I mean, it's, frustration sort of comes of expectation, I think. If you expect high, good things and you don't get them, then it becomes frustrating. But if your expectations are very low and then those low expectations are met, you're not frustrated because you're expecting it anyway. So it was fine. It was fun. It was enjoyable. And then, of course, Cataclysm was announced. At this point, we're still going through ICC. Ruby Sanctum isn't quite out yet. And then I had a Cataclysm of my own. Never mind my graphics card. The whole computer just went... I was playing, and all of a sudden, there was a purple flash from beside me. That was that gone. I think it was because I used to take the cover off. It probably wasn't the most suitable case for the computer, and some dust had shorted out the motherboard. So that was the whole thing gone. Now, at the time, I'd just met a new lady friend, who's now my fiancée, but at the time was a girlfriend who does not understand computer games at all. Doesn't like them. So I thought it's probably not a good idea that I spend a lot of time playing World of Warcraft. I'm not going to get very far with her. So I had to build up rep. You start off as neutral. You don't want to go into hated or even unfriendly. So you have to build it up. You have to get friendly, honoured, revered and exalted. So I had to build my rep up. And also I just started a new job as well, and that was going to take up a certain amount of my time. So I just didn't bother buying a new computer. So again, left the game again. Not that I'd really come back in what I would term coming back, because I was just playing casually anyway. So that was basically it for Wrath. I mean, that's all there was to it for me. Whereas Retribution Paladins had a good old time in there, and I completely missed it. So yeah, my timing is impeccable. Which then brings me on to Kata. Now here's the good thing about Kata. I did eventually come back because the job had settled down, and my partner would sort of settled down, and I'd started to play a few little MMOs just to test the water, and she was sort of okay with it. So then I went, I'll play World of Warcraft again. I'll get back into proper raiding. So I came back in Kata towards the end of Firelands. Now here is and this irony has been pointed out to me, as I've already said. I left the game just before Ulduar came out, which is like one of the most awesome raid instances people say there have been. And I came back just in time for Dragon Soul, which is not one of the most popular raid instances there's ever been. So yes, I missed out the good ones. And also as a result, my thoughts about Cataclysm are severely skewed negatively, I would say. Because what some people will argue are the good things about Cataclysm, I didn't see at all. The first two raid tiers, Firelands, I've only ever seen sort of been blasted through it, been boosted through it, basically, by people who know what they're doing, and the tier 11 raid instances, again didn't progress through those. So yeah, I came back to look around people in Stormwind and see, bloody hell, look how much mana they've got, look how much health they've got, just see the stat explosion, and went ugh. So I leveled up, only needed 5 levels at this point, so it's 80 to 85. Leveled up, came back to find, holy power. So the spec had changed a lot. I mean, the spec does change a lot between expansions. And usually you get to, because you always have to learn how to play the class anew from expansion to expansion. This is always the case. And the time you usually do that is during that 2 or 1 month period when you get the pre-expansion patch. You get 1 month when you've got all the new abilities, not necessarily the level cap talents and abilities, but you've got most of the mechanics are there. So you get a bit of time to try that out in your farm content. Well, obviously I missed that. I wasn't in beta. Beta's another good place to try these things out, so I wasn't in that, so I didn't get that either. So I came straight into it, knowing, again, just in time for the catch-up dungeons. So we had the end time, don't remember the other two, but we had those 3 dungeons again that again gave access to epic gear that would give you good enough gear to then go into Dragon Soul. Found a guild that would actually take me, you know, sort of semi-casual, you would say. They weren't completely casual. They treat the raids a little bit seriously, but weren't completely serious as well. So it was a halfway house between the guild I'd been in with my friend and the more serious guilds I'd been in prior to that. Still clicking away, been a clicker all the way up to this point. It is in Cataclysm and in Dragon Soul particularly that I realised that this wasn't going to wash anymore. We now had so many new abilities. You know, you had the zealotry in there, and you had holy power. Now you have this different resource to use, and all the other abilities at the time. I mean, I know they've sort of trimmed away a few for WoD, and they've trimmed away even more for Legion. But at the time, we were just getting more and more abilities each expansion, rather than any others being taken away. So there was no way in hell that clicking was ever going to wash. And people always argue key binding is better anyway, and you know, once you do it, you agree it is. But you know, clicking was fine up to a point. When you was very few abilities, it was fine. But it was no longer fine. But at the same time, I couldn't think to myself, right, I need to learn to keybind, because when you're learning, you will be god awful, because you will do your instinct will be to click, and you'll do a halfway house thing, and it will all be very bad. And there was no way I'd have been able to compete. I was able to manage clicking. I was able to be competitive in that guild. So what I did is I waited for the progress to be over, and then on farm thought to myself before MOP, because when I came back to Cata, I didn't actually expect to get into a raiding guild for Dragon Soul. I thought I will build myself up, get used to the game, and then apply for one for MOP for the next expansion coming out. But as I say, as it turns out, I managed to get into one for Dragon Soul, which is good. So, but I was still thinking long term there, get myself ready for MOP. So I started to learn to keybind, knowing that I would get it wrong to begin with, and it would take a week or two just to get the instincts right, and also to work out where I'm going to sort of place certain abilities as well. So yeah, that took me a couple of weeks to get that right, but when you go on farm, it wasn't too bad, so that was okay as well. I mean, there were several things from the Paladin point of view that were very new as well as Holy Power, which is the obvious one. You know, censure cleave. I mean, one thing that surprised me in Wrath, if I'll just go quickly back to Wrath, is when I came back after my sort of extended leave, to find that we were using what had always been a tanking seal for DPS, Seal of Vengeance. It's like, what are we using this for DPS now? Yeah, not Seal of Command. No, not unless you want to cleave. Okay. So, and then we came, you know, especially in Cataclysm, across the concept of censure cleaving. So, alternating between 2 targets to keep your 5 stacks of censure on them. What a pain in the arse that was. Utter pain in the arse. We still had it. As late as WoD, we've still had it. We had this in tier 17. The only reason we don't have it in tier 18 is because of the empty drinking horn trinket. What a crap, man. I'm glad that's going. That's the one thing that makes me glad seals are actually going. I'm not actually glad seals are going, but the one thing that sugarcoats the pill is the fact that I will never have to censure cleave again, because this is the stupidest thing ever. But yeah, this became a thing, censure cleaving between 2 targets. God, Bennett. Mana was still an issue even in Cataclysm, and yes, they'd taken some steps in Wrath. They still hadn't quite got it sorted out, even with Holy Power. I mean, MOP is when it really came to its fore, but that's for next time. So yeah, in Cataclysm, we still had mana issues if you blew everything. I mean, you're all right on most boss fights, but if you were having to absolutely blow everything, mana could still be an issue. I certainly found it still to be an issue. We had George. I enjoyed George, Guardian of the Ancient Kings. I called mine George. There was another Retribution Paladin in the raid. I have very rarely been in guilds where there's been another Retribution Paladin. this was the first time I had ever been in this situation. So we had to agree different names for us. He called his Elroy. Mine was George. I missed George. I liked George. But what was bizarre was popping him before a fight had even started, because that's what you did then. It works differently to how it worked in Mob. So you would sort of pop it, I can't remember how it was, it was up to maybe even 10 seconds before the fight starts, to build up the strength bonus you got. So then you could fly in at the start with all the cooldowns going and everything else firing off. Maximum damage. Whew, bizarre, that. Really bizarre. I mean, what else? I mean, other thing. I mean, just in terms of the way Paladins worked, it was mostly centered around this idea of a dual resource system. From my personal point of view, though, Cataclysm, I would say, was the expansion where I completely changed the way I played the game, full stop. So not only did I have to move from clicking to key binding, I also started to look at custom UIs. I hadn't really customized my UI very much. I, used add-ons to be able to move my raid frames to somewhere more suitable. It was more important in the first couple of expansions when I had a really small monitor. Once I'd got a widescreen monitor, that was less of an issue, just show it out to the sides. But I did start to play around with UI add-ons, like alternate UIs, and I played around with quite a few. Elf UI, the one I use now, sort of came in Mop, and that's the one I sort of settled on. But at the time, I was doing a lot of experimentation with different UIs, and really going on the add-on. I had used minimal add-ons before. Obviously, you'd use the essential sort of raiding add-on. CT Raid Assist was the first one I ever used, then Aura, and things like that. And then Deadly Boss Mods by the time we're getting to this point. And now it's bigwigs. But those sort of things you would use. But I really, and a damage meter and something like that, and a threat meter perhaps, although you don't use that anymore. So, yeah, I started to look at add-ons much more and see what they could do for customizing my layout, especially as I was going to have to go with key binding. It was all basically around that. If I was going to have to key bind, I'm going to have more of, because at the time, the standard Blizzard UI, you have to scroll between your different action bars. You can only have so many visible. So I thought, well, I'm going to have all of them visible so I can see what I'm doing. Even though a lot of people sort of don't, because they use a standard set. But at the time, you see, when I was still learning, I wouldn't always remember where I'd put my abilities as well. So I needed something, and I still keep it there now. I could get rid of it because I now know where everything is. Although I still leave it there, it's not really in the way. And that was it. And then, of course, you were getting ready for Mop. And that was the first time I really looked, I would say, at an expansion towards the end of Cata, where I thought, right, okay, I'm developing as a player. I'm not just sort of going through it at any rate. I'd come back to the game with a vengeance. I'm really looking at this now. I'm going to go into serious raiding. I knew that I was likely to have... I mean, I'm not someone who sort of jumps from one guild to another, although I have been in a number of guilds. But I knew that I was going to have to change guilds at some point. But I didn't know what the trigger for that would be. And that came in Mop as well. But I was making sure that I would be absolutely ready for that. But anyway, that's sort of my story. Playing a Paladin in Wrath and Cata. The next time, and the last one from the past, will be Mr. Pandaria. And I will do that next week. And until then, I'll see you later.